I never thought I would end up filing a police report against my homeowners association president. But there I was at the Scottsdale Police Department on a Tuesday afternoon, holding a folder full of receipts and serial numbers, while Officer Martinez typed up my statement. It started 3 weeks earlier, when the power grid in our Arizona neighborhood went down during one of those brutal September heat waves. The temperature hit 118 degrees, and the utility company sent out alerts warning us that rolling blackouts would continue for at least 48 hours while they repaired damaged equipment. I live in Desert Vista Estates, a planned community with about 200 homes, and like most neighborhoods in Scottsdale, we have an HOA that thinks it runs a small country instead of a subdivision. My name is Warren Zimmerman, and I had just invested in a Honda EU 7000 IS generator after the last power outage nearly cost me $3,000 in spoiled food and a ruined home office setup. This generator was not cheap. I paid $4,800 for the unit itself, plus another $600 for a professional-grade 25-foot power cord that could handle the amperage needed to run my central air conditioning, refrigerator, and essential appliances. The cord was a custom-built piece with industrial connectors on both ends, and I had it specially made at an electrical supply shop in Phoenix because the standard cords couldn't handle the load I needed. When the blackout hit, I was prepared. I rolled the generator out of my garage, positioned it the required 15 feet away from my house per fire safety codes, and hooked everything up. The blessed sound of air conditioning humming to life was worth every penny I had spent. My neighbors were not so lucky. I could see them sweating on their porches, fanning themselves with magazines and newspapers, while my house remained a cool 72 degrees. That is when Brenda Carmichael noticed what I was doing. Brenda is the HOA president, a 53-year-old woman with short blonde hair that she keeps in that aggressive soccer mom style, the kind that demands to speak to managers at every retail establishment in the county. She drives a white BMW X5 with a bumper sticker that says, HOA board member, like it is some kind of law enforcement credential. I had only lived in Desert Vista Estates for 8 months, but I had already learned that Brenda treated the neighborhood covenants like they were constitutional amendments. She marched across the street from her house to mine, her phone already in her hand, sunglasses perched on her head despite the blazing sun. I was in my garage, monitoring the generator's output on my phone app, when I heard her voice cut through the mechanical hum. "Excuse me, Warren," she called out, her tone already dripping with that particular brand of artificial sweetness that promised incoming hostility. "I need to speak with you about your generator situation." I stepped out of the garage and immediately regretted it. The heat hit me like a physical wall, and I could feel sweat forming on my forehead within seconds. "What about it, Brenda?" "Well, I have been reviewing our HOA covenants, and Section 12, Paragraph 4 clearly states that generators are not permitted to be visible from the street between the hours of 8 a.m. and 8 p.m. Your generator is in clear violation." She tapped her phone screen. "I am documenting this with photos for the board." I stared at her. "Brenda, there is no power. It is 118 degrees outside. People could literally die from heat stroke." "The covenants don't have exceptions for weather conditions," she replied, snapping photos of my generator setup from multiple angles. "Rules are rules, Warren. If we let one person violate the covenants, then everyone will think they can do whatever they want. You cannot be serious right now." "I am completely serious. You have until 8 p.m. to remove the generator from view, or the HOA will begin assessing daily fines of $100 per day." I took a deep breath, trying to maintain my composure. Brenda, I paid good money for this equipment so my family would not suffer during outages. The generator is positioned exactly where it needs to be for safety reasons. I am not moving it. Her expression hardened. Then you will be fined. Good day, Warren. She turned on her heel and marched back toward her house, her phone still held up as she took more photos. I went back inside my blessedly cool house and tried to forget about the interaction. My wife Sarah was working from home that day, and she had seen the whole exchange through the front window. She is unbelievable, Sarah said, shaking her head. Half the neighborhood is suffering, and she is worried about covenant violations. That is Brenda for you, I muttered. I am not moving the generator, though. She can fine me all she wants. I will fight it. The power came back on late that evening, and I shut down the generator, coiled up my expensive power cord, and stored everything back in the garage. I thought that would be the end of it, but 3 days later, I received a formal violation notice in the mail. The HOA was assessing me a $200 fine for unauthorized visible mechanical equipment and demanding payment within 30 days. I drafted a response letter explaining the emergency circumstances and citing Arizona state laws that protect homeowners' rights to operate emergency equipment during utility failures. I sent it certified mail and figured that would resolve the situation. The HOA board would see reason, or at least the other board members would overrule Brenda's ridiculous fine. 2 weeks passed, and I received a response. The board had upheld the fine and added another $50 in administrative fees for filing a frivolous appeal. I was furious, but I decided to let it go for the moment. I would pay the stupid fine under protest and bring it up at the next HOA meeting when I could address all the homeowners directly. Then, the second power outage hit. This one was worse because it happened at night, and the utility company said it would take at least 24 hours to restore service. I waited until 8 a.m., technically outside the prohibited hours according to the covenant, and set up my generator again. This time I made sure everything was documented. I took photos showing the time stamps, measured the distance from my house to comply with fire codes, and even printed out the relevant Arizona state statutes to have on hand if Brenda showed up again. She did not show up that morning, and I figured maybe she had finally backed off. I ran the generator all day, keeping my house comfortable and my food from spoiling. Around 6 p.m., I went outside to refuel the generator and noticed something odd. My power cord was missing. I stared at the empty space where the cord should have been. The generator was still running, but someone had disconnected the cord from the house end and taken the entire 25-foot length. My heart started pounding as I realized what had happened. That cord had cost me $600, and more importantly, it was custom-made with specific connectors that were not easy to replace. I checked around the side of the house, thinking maybe it had somehow fallen or been moved. Nothing. I checked my garage. Not there either. Someone had stolen my generator cord right out of my yard in broad daylight. Sarah came outside. "What's wrong?" "Someone took the cord," I said, my voice tight with anger. "The whole thing. Just disconnected it and walked off with it. Are you serious? Who would do that?" I had a pretty good idea who would do that, but I needed proof. I went back inside and pulled up the footage from my Ring doorbell camera. The camera covered the front of my house and part of the driveway, but it didn't have a great angle on the side yard where the generator was positioned. I scrubbed through the footage from the afternoon and found something interesting. At 2:47 p.m., Brenda's white BMW pulled up in front of my house. She got out, looked around, and walked purposefully toward the side of my house, disappearing from the camera's view. 3 minutes later, she reappeared carrying something orange and black, rolled up in her arms. My cord. She put it in her trunk, got back in her car, and drove away. "That absolute lunatic," I said, replaying the footage for Sarah. "She stole our property." "Call the police," Sarah said immediately. "That is theft. I don't care if she is the HOA president." I called the non-emergency police line and explained the situation. The dispatcher said an officer would come by to take a report. Officer Martinez arrived about 45 minutes later, and I showed him the video footage on my phone. He watched it twice, taking notes. "So you are saying the HOA president took your generator cord," he said, wanting to make sure he understood correctly. "Yes, that is her in the video. Brenda Carmichael. She lives right across the street." I pointed to her house. "And you have proof of ownership for this cord?" "Absolutely." I went inside and grabbed my folder. I had the receipt from the electrical supply shop in Phoenix, dated 3 months earlier. The receipt included the serial number of the cord, which the shop owner had recorded because it was a custom order. I also had photos I had taken when the cord was first delivered, showing the serial number stamped on the connector housing. Officer Martinez examined everything carefully. "Okay, this is pretty straightforward. I am going to go speak with Miss Carmichael. Do you want to press charges if she has the cord?" "Yes, I do," I said firmly. "She has been harassing me about the generator since the first outage. This is theft, plain and simple." The officer walked across the street, and I watched from my front window as he rang Brenda's doorbell. She answered, and I could see her animated gestures even from a distance. The conversation lasted about 10 minutes before the officer returned to my house. "She says she doesn't have your cord," Officer Martinez said. "She claims she was just checking on your property because she was concerned about safety violations." "That is complete nonsense. The video clearly shows her carrying something and putting it in her trunk." "I agree the video is compelling, but she is denying it. Here is what I can do. I can file a report for theft and you can pursue this through the courts. Or if you want, I can come back with a warrant to search her property, but that will take time to arrange." I felt the frustration building. "So she can just steal my property and lie about it, and that is it?" "Not at all. The video evidence is solid, but I cannot search her house or vehicle without her consent or a warrant. File the report, and I will make sure the case gets assigned to our property crimes unit. They will follow up." I filed the report, and Officer Martinez gave me a case number. He said someone would contact me within a few days. In the meantime, I had to buy a replacement cord because the power was still out, and I needed to keep my generator running. I drove to 3 different electrical supply stores before I found one that could make a similar cord, but it would take 5 days to complete. I ended up buying a temporary standard cord that could not handle my full load, meaning I had to carefully manage what appliances I ran at any given time. The next morning, I received an email from the HOA. Brenda had sent a message to all residents informing them that unauthorized and dangerous electrical equipment had been observed in the neighborhood, and the board was implementing new emergency regulations. Effective immediately, all generators had to be approved in writing by the HOA board before use, and they could only operate between 6 a.m. and 10 p.m. Any violations would result in immediate fines of $500 per day. I could not believe the audacity. She stole my property, and now she was creating new rules to punish me further. I responded to the email, copying all residents, explaining that Arizona state law explicitly protects homeowners' rights to operate emergency equipment during power outages, and that the HOA's new regulations were likely unenforceable. I did not mention the stolen cord in the email because I did not want to compromise the police investigation, but I made it clear that Brenda was overstepping her authority. Within an hour, my phone started ringing. Other residents were calling to express their support. Apparently, I was not the only person who had issues with Brenda's aggressive enforcement of petty rules. One neighbor, Tom, told me that Brenda had fined him $150 because his garbage cans were visible from the street for more than 2 hours after trash pickup. Another neighbor, Jennifer, said Brenda had threatened to put a lien on her house because her front lawn had a few brown patches during a drought. "We have been trying to get her removed from the board for over a year," Jennifer told me, "but she controls the votes. Her friends on the board always back her up, no matter what." "Well, maybe this theft case will finally be what takes her down," I said. 2 days later, I got a call from Detective Sarah Kowalski from the Scottsdale Police Department's Property Crimes Unit. She had reviewed my case and wanted to meet with me to get more details. We arranged to meet at my house the following afternoon. Detective Kowalski was a sharp woman in her early 40s with dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail. She reviewed all my documentation, watched the Ring camera footage multiple times, and took detailed notes. "This is a pretty clear-cut case," she said. "The video shows her taking the item, and you have proof of ownership with the serial number. The problem is that she is denying having it, so I need to locate the cord to make an arrest." "Can you get a warrant to search her house?" I asked. "I am working on it. The video gives me probable cause, but I need to go through the proper channels. These things take time, especially for a property crime. If this was a violent offense, I could move faster, but for theft under $1,000, it is going to take a few days to get a judge to sign off. The cord cost $600, plus I had to buy a replacement, and there is the principle of the thing. She is the HOA president and she is stealing from residents. I understand completely, and I am going to pursue this. Just give me some time to build the case properly. In the meantime, if you notice anything else suspicious, document it and let me know immediately." Detective Kowalski left, and I went back to my routine, such as it was. The power had been restored again, but I knew another outage was inevitable. Arizona summers were brutal on the electrical grid, and the utility company had been warning for years that the infrastructure was not keeping up with population growth. A week later, I received my new custom cord from the electrical supply shop. It cost me another $650 because prices had gone up, and I had to pay a rush fee to get it completed faster. I stored it carefully in my garage, this time with a heavy-duty lock on the storage cabinet where I kept my generator equipment. The next HOA board meeting was scheduled for a Thursday evening, and I made sure to attend. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a small building near the neighborhood pool. About 30 residents showed up, which was a much higher turnout than usual. Apparently, word had spread about the generator controversy and Brenda's new emergency regulations. Brenda sat at the front table with 2 other board members, Richard and Susan. Richard was a retired accountant who seemed to rubber stamp whatever Brenda wanted, and Susan was a real estate agent who was more interested in checking her phone than paying attention to neighborhood issues. "I would like to open the floor for resident comments," Brenda said, her voice formal and controlled. "Please keep remarks to 2 minutes per person." I raised my hand immediately, and Brenda's expression tightened when she saw me. "Warren, go ahead." I stood up and addressed the room. "I want to talk about the HOA's new generator regulations. First, these regulations were implemented without a proper vote of the residents, which violates our own bylaws. Second, the regulations contradict Arizona state law, which explicitly protects homeowners' rights to operate emergency equipment during utility failures. Third, and most importantly, I want everyone to know that someone stole my $600 generator cord during the last power outage, and I have video evidence showing who did it. I have filed a police report, and the investigation is ongoing." The room erupted in murmurs. Brenda's face went red. "That is an inappropriate comment for this forum, Warren. If you have a legal issue, you need to address it through proper channels." "I am addressing it through proper channels," I said calmly. "The police are handling the theft. But I think the residents deserve to know that the person who stole my property is the same person who is trying to fine me for using emergency equipment during a heat wave." "You are out of order," Brenda snapped. "Sit down, or I will have you removed from the meeting." "Under what authority?" I shot back. "This is a homeowners meeting. I am a homeowner. I have every right to speak." Tom stood up from the back of the room. "I want to hear more about this. Who stole your cord, Warren?" "I have video footage from my Ring camera," I said. "It clearly shows someone coming to my property, taking the cord and putting it in their vehicle. I have provided this evidence to the police." "Are you accusing me of theft?" Brenda demanded, standing up from her chair. "Because if you are, that is slander and I will sue you." "I am not accusing anyone," I said carefully. "I am stating facts. Someone stole my property. I have video evidence. The police are investigating. If you are concerned about slander, maybe you should be more concerned about proving your innocence." "This meeting is adjourned," Brenda announced abruptly, grabbing her papers and shoving them into her bag. "You cannot just adjourn the meeting because you don't like what someone is saying," Jennifer called out. "We have other business to discuss." But Brenda was already walking toward the door, with Richard and Susan scrambling to follow her. The remaining residents sat in stunned silence for a moment before everyone started talking at once. I left the meeting feeling vindicated but also frustrated. Brenda was clearly panicking, which suggested guilt, but I still did not have my cord back, and the police investigation seemed to be moving at a glacial pace. The next morning, Detective Kowalski called me. "I have good news and bad news," she said. "The good news is that I got a warrant approved to search Brenda Carmichael's property. The bad news is that I need to schedule it carefully because I don't want to tip her off and give her time to dispose of the evidence." "When are you going to execute the warrant?" "Tomorrow morning." "I will have 2 officers with me. Can you be available in case we need you to identify the cord?" "Absolutely." The next morning, I waited anxiously in my living room, watching through the window as Detective Kowalski and 2 uniformed officers arrived at Brenda's house around 9 a.m. Brenda's car was in the driveway, so she was home. I watched as the detective rang the doorbell and held up the warrant when Brenda answered. Even from across the street, I could hear Brenda's raised voice. The detective remained calm, gesturing toward the warrant and explaining something. Brenda tried to close the door, but one of the uniformed officers stepped forward and prevented her from doing so. After a tense moment, Brenda stepped aside and allowed them to enter. The search took about 45 minutes. I saw the officers going in and out of the house, checking the garage and even opening Brenda's car trunk. Finally, Detective Kowalski emerged carrying a familiar orange and black bundle. My cord. She crossed the street to my house and I opened the door before she could knock. "Is that it?" she asked, holding up the cord. "That looks like it, but I need to check the serial number to be certain." I took the cord and examined the connector housing. There, stamped into the metal, was the serial number, HU 702475TX. I pulled out my receipt and photos. Perfect match. "That is definitely my cord," I confirmed. "Serial number matches exactly. Great. I am going to need you to come down to the station to make a formal identification for the report, but this is enough for me to make an arrest." I watched as Detective Kowalski walked back across the street. She said something to Brenda, who immediately started protesting loudly. But the detective was already pulling out handcuffs. One of the uniformed officers took Brenda's arm and guided her toward the patrol car. Brenda was yelling the entire time, something about how this was a misunderstanding and she was going to sue everyone involved. Several neighbors had come out of their houses to watch the spectacle. I saw Tom giving me a thumbs up from his front porch. Jennifer was recording the whole thing on her phone. Brenda was placed in the back of the patrol car, and the officers drove away. Detective Kowalski came back to my house with the cord. "I am going to need to keep this as evidence for now," she said. "But once the case is resolved, you will get it back. Can you come down to the station this afternoon to finish the paperwork?" "Absolutely." "What is she being charged with?" "Theft of property valued between $500 and $1,000, which is a Class 6 felony in Arizona. She could also face additional charges for filing a false report with police, since she denied having the cord when Officer Martinez initially questioned her." A Class 6 felony. I had not expected it to be that serious, but I was not going to feel bad for Brenda. She had brought this on herself. I went to the police station that afternoon and spent an hour going through all the details with Detective Kowalski. I signed statements, provided copies of all my receipts and photos, and verified the chain of events. The detective explained that the case would now go to the county attorney's office, and they would decide whether to prosecute. "Given the video evidence and the matching serial number, this is about as solid as a case can get," Detective Kowalski said. "I would be shocked if they don't move forward with charges." Over the next few days, the neighborhood was buzzing with gossip. Brenda had been released on her own recognizance after being booked at the police station, but she was staying inside her house and not talking to anyone. Richard and Susan both resigned from the HOA board, apparently not wanting to be associated with the scandal. The HOA was functionally leaderless, and several residents started organizing to call an emergency meeting to elect a new board. I received a call from Brenda's attorney, a man named David Hoffman. He wanted to discuss a possible settlement. "My client is willing to pay for the cord and any related expenses if you agree to drop the charges," he said. "The charges are criminal, not civil," I pointed out. "I cannot drop them." "That is up to the county attorney. You could decline to cooperate with the prosecution." "Why would I do that? Your client stole from me, lied about it, and tried to use her position in the HOA to punish me for calling her out. I have no interest in settling." "Mr. Zimmerman, I understand you are upset, but a criminal conviction could have serious consequences for Miss Carmichael's career and personal life. She is willing to make full restitution and issue a formal apology. She should have thought about that before she committed theft. No deal." The attorney sighed. "I will advise my client accordingly, but I should warn you that we will be fighting these charges vigorously. The video evidence is not as clear as the police seem to think." "The serial number matches," I said. "That is not ambiguous. We will see what the court says." The call ended, and I immediately contacted Detective Kowalski to let her know about the settlement offer. She thanked me for the information and said it would be included in the case file. 3 weeks later, I received a notice that Brenda had been formally charged with 1 count of theft and 1 count of making a false statement to law enforcement. Her arraignment was scheduled for the following month at the Scottsdale Municipal Court. Meanwhile, the HOA held an emergency meeting to elect a new board. Jennifer ended up being voted in as president, with Tom as vice president. One of their first actions was to rescind the emergency generator regulations that Brenda had implemented. They also voted to refund my $200 fine plus the $50 administrative fee from the first generator incident. "We are going to completely overhaul how this HOA operates," Jennifer told me after the meeting. "Brenda turned it into her personal fiefdom, and that ends now. We are going to focus on actual community needs, not petty covenant enforcement." I was relieved to hear it, but my focus was on the upcoming court case. I wanted to make sure Brenda faced consequences for what she had done. The arraignment was a relatively brief proceeding. Brenda appeared with her attorney and pleaded not guilty to both charges. The judge set a trial date for 2 months later and established some basic conditions of release, including that Brenda was not to contact me or come onto my property. As we left the courtroom, Brenda's attorney approached me in the hallway. "My client maintains her innocence," he said, "but she is willing to make one more settlement offer. She will pay $2,000 and issue a formal apology if you convince the prosecutor to reduce the charges to a misdemeanor." "Again, that is not my decision," I said. "Talk to the county attorney. The county attorney is more likely to consider a plea deal if the victim supports it. I don't support it. See you at trial." The next 2 months passed slowly. I kept expecting something dramatic to happen, but it was mostly just a waiting game. My generator cord was still in police evidence, so I continued using the replacement I had purchased. Fortunately, there were no more major power outages during that time. About 2 weeks before the trial, Detective Kowalski called me with an update. Brenda's attorney filed a motion to suppress the Ring camera footage, claiming it was obtained without proper warrant procedure. The judge denied the motion. The video is admissible. That is good news. It gets better. The prosecution reviewed the case and decided to add another charge, abuse of official position. Since Brenda used her HOA authority to retaliate against you after you reported the theft, they are treating it as an enhancement. What does that mean for the charges? The original theft charge remains a Class 6 felony. But with the abuse of position enhancement, if she is convicted, the sentencing guidelines are more severe. She could face up to a year in jail, though first-time offenders usually get probation. The important thing is that it makes the case harder for her to plead down. The trial finally began on a Tuesday morning. The courtroom was small, with only a few rows of seats for spectators. Sarah came with me for moral support, and I noticed several of my neighbors in attendance as well. Brenda sat at the defense table with her attorney, looking pale and anxious. The prosecution was handled by an assistant county attorney named Michael Chen. He was a young guy, probably in his early 30s, but he seemed confident and well prepared. During his opening statement, he laid out the case methodically. The Ring camera footage clearly showed Brenda taking the cord from my property. I had proof of ownership through receipts and serial numbers. When questioned by police, Brenda had denied having the cord, but it was found in her possession during the execution of a search warrant. The serial number on the recovered cord matched my documentation exactly. Brenda's attorney, David Hoffman, gave a different version during his opening statement. He claimed that Brenda had found the cord lying in the street and picked it up, intending to return it to its rightful owner. She did not realize it belonged to me specifically. When the police came to question her, she was confused and said she did not have Warren's cord because she did not know the cord she had found was mine. It was all an innocent misunderstanding, blown out of proportion by a vindictive homeowner who resented the HOA's authority. I almost laughed out loud at the absurdity of the defense, but I kept my composure. The prosecution called its first witness, Officer Martinez, who testified about responding to my initial call and taking the theft report. He described watching the Ring camera footage and then going to question Brenda, who had denied having the cord. His testimony was straightforward and professional, Next was Detective Kowalski. She walked through the investigation process, explaining how she obtained the search warrant and executed it. She described finding the cord in Brenda's garage, hidden in a storage cabinet. She testified about my identification of the cord using the serial number and matching it to the purchase receipt. Then, it was my turn to testify. Michael Chen asked me about purchasing the cord, the first power outage and my interaction with Brenda, and the second outage when the cord was stolen. I described checking my Ring camera footage and seeing Brenda take the cord. I explained the serial number documentation and how I had identified the recovered cord as mine. During cross-examination, David Hoffman tried to poke holes in my testimony. "Mr. Zimmerman, is it possible that the cord you saw in the video was a different cord that just looked similar?" "No, because the serial number matches." "But you didn't see the serial number in the video, did you?" "No, but the cord recovered from your client's garage has my serial number on it. Unless you're suggesting someone else stole my cord and then, coincidentally, your client happened to have an identical cord with the same serial number in her garage, which she denied having when police first asked." Several jurors smiled at that response, and Hoffman moved on quickly. "You and my client had a contentious relationship regarding HOA matters, correct? Your client fined me for using emergency equipment during a power outage, yes. And you resented that fine. I thought it was unreasonable and fought it through proper channels, yes. So you had a motive to fabricate this theft claim to retaliate against Miss Carmichael. I have video footage of her taking the cord. I have serial number documentation. I have the recovered cord. How exactly would I fabricate all of that?" Hoffman had no good answer and ended his cross-examination shortly after. The prosecution's final witness was the owner of the electrical supply shop in Phoenix, where I had purchased the cord. He brought his records showing the custom order, the serial number assignment, and the sale to me. He explained that each custom cord they made had a unique serial number stamped on the connector housing for warranty and tracking purposes. There was no way the cord found in Brenda's garage could have belonged to anyone else. The defense tried to argue that Brenda should be allowed to testify about finding the cord in the street, but the prosecution objected on the grounds that her story kept changing and was contradicted by the physical evidence. The judge allowed her to testify but warned the jury to consider credibility carefully. Brenda took the stand and immediately started crying. She testified that she had seen a cord lying in the street near my house during the power outage. Concerned that it might be a safety hazard, she picked it up and put it in her car, intending to figure out who it belonged to. She did not realize it was connected to my generator at the time. When Officer Martinez came to question her, she was confused about what he was asking and denied having Warren's cord because she did not know the cord she had found was mine. She had forgotten about it in her garage until the police came with the warrant. It was a creative story, but it fell apart during cross-examination. Michael Chen was relentless. "Miss Carmichael, you testified that you found the cord in the street. But the Ring camera footage shows you walking onto Mr. Zimmerman's property, going to the side of his house where the generator was located, and then returning to your car with the cord. That does not look like someone picking up a random item from the street, does it?" I may have misremembered exactly where I found it. Or you are lying now to avoid a theft conviction. "Objection," Hoffman shouted. "Sustained," the judge said. "Rephrase, counselor." "Miss Carmichael, is it your testimony that you simply forgot about finding a $600 industrial cord and storing it in your garage?" "I have a lot on my mind. I am the HOA president, and I manage a lot of responsibilities." but you remembered enough to deny having it when the police asked you directly. Brenda stammered, unable to provide a coherent answer. And Miss Carmichael, you testified that you were concerned about safety. But Mr. Zimmerman's generator was operating perfectly safely, 15 feet from his house, in compliance with fire codes. In fact, you had already fined him once for using the generator. You wanted him to stop using it, didn't you? I wanted him to comply with HOA covenants. And when he refused, you decided to take matters into your own hands by stealing his equipment. No, that is not what happened. But the damage was done. Brenda's testimony was unconvincing, and her emotional breakdown on the stand made her seem guilty rather than sympathetic. The defense rested without calling any other witnesses. The closing arguments were brief. Michael Chen summarized the evidence, emphasizing the video footage and the serial number match. David Hoffman argued that the case was based on circumstantial evidence and that Brenda's explanation was plausible. But even he seemed to know it was a losing battle. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours. When they returned, the foreperson read the verdict, guilty on both counts, theft and making a false statement to law enforcement. The judge also found sufficient evidence for the abuse of official position enhancement. Brenda collapsed into her chair, sobbing. Her attorney put a hand on her shoulder, but she shrugged it off. The judge scheduled sentencing for 3 weeks later and reminded Brenda of her release conditions. As we left the courtroom, I felt a strange mix of emotions. I was relieved that justice had been served, but I also felt a bit sad that it had come to this. Brenda had brought it all on herself through her own arrogance and vindictiveness, but watching someone's life fall apart is never pleasant, even when they deserve it. The sentencing hearing was anticlimactic. Brenda's attorney presented several character witnesses who testified about her volunteer work and contributions to the community. The prosecution countered with testimony from other residents about her abusive behavior as HOA president. In the end, the judge sentenced her to 1 year of supervised probation, 200 hours of community service, and ordered her to pay full restitution to me, including the cost of both cords and my legal expenses. She also had to pay a $2,500 fine to the court. The judge added one more condition that I had not expected. Miss Carmichael, as part of your probation, you are prohibited from serving in any official capacity with a homeowners association for the duration of your sentence. If you violate any of these conditions, you will serve 90 days in jail. You understand? Yes, Your Honor, Brenda whispered. After the hearing, Michael Chen approached me in the hallway. Thanks for sticking with this case, he said. A lot of victims would have taken a plea deal just to avoid trial. You standing firm made it possible to hold her accountable. I am just glad it is over, I said. You might want to consider a civil suit as well. You could probably recover additional damages for harassment and emotional distress. I will think about it, but honestly, I just want to move on. And that is what I did. Brenda paid the restitution within 30 days, and I got my original cord back from police evidence. The HOA, under Jennifer's leadership, became a much more reasonable organization focused on legitimate community concerns rather than petty enforcement. Several other homeowners who had been targeted by Brenda's overzealous rule enforcement came forward with their own stories, and the new board worked to reverse unfair fines and correct abuses. Brenda ended up selling her house and moving out of Desert Vista Estates about 6 months after the conviction. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had taken a job in a different state and was trying to rebuild her life away from the scandal. I felt no satisfaction in her downfall, but I also felt no sympathy. She had been given every opportunity to do the right thing, from the moment she first stole the cord through the multiple settlement offers. She had chosen to lie, double down, and fight rather than admit wrongdoing and make amends. The whole experience taught me something important about standing up for yourself when you are right, even when it is uncomfortable or difficult. A lot of people would have just let Brenda get away with stealing the cord because going through the legal process seemed like too much hassle. But theft is theft, and abusing a position of authority to retaliate against someone makes it even worse. I am glad I followed through, not just for myself, but for all the other residents who had suffered under Brenda's petty tyranny. The story spread beyond our neighborhood, eventually getting picked up by a local news station that did a piece on HOA abuses of power. I gave a brief interview about the experience, and the resulting publicity led to some calls for state-level HOA reform legislation. I don't know if anything will come of that, but at least people are talking about the issue. These days, life in Desert Vista Estates is much more peaceful. I run my generator whenever I need to without worrying about fines or harassment. The HOA board actually does useful things like organizing neighborhood events and maintaining common areas. And I have a very good security system, including cameras with excellent coverage of my entire property, just in case anyone else gets any ideas about helping themselves to my equipment. Looking back on the whole saga, from that first power outage to the final sentencing hearing, I am struck by how a simple act of pettiness and vindictiveness snowballed into a criminal conviction. If Brenda had just accepted that people need to use generators during power outages, none of this would have happened. If she had admitted taking the cord and returned it when first questioned by police, she might have faced only minor consequences. But her need to control and punish people, combined with her refusal to admit wrongdoing even when caught red-handed, destroyed her reputation and resulted in a criminal record. I sometimes wonder what goes through the mind of someone like Brenda. Did she really think she would get away with it? Did she convince herself that she was justified in taking my property because I had violated her precious covenants? Or was it just pure spite, a moment of anger that led to a stupid decision that spiraled out of control? I will never know the answers to those questions, and honestly, I don't need to. What matters is that justice was served, my property was returned, and the neighborhood is a better place without her toxic leadership. The whole experience reinforced my faith in the legal system, even though it took time and patience to work through the process. The video evidence was crucial, as were the serial numbers and documentation. Without those elements, it might have been my word against hers, and who knows how that would have turned out. So my advice to anyone dealing with similar situations is simple. Document everything, stand up for yourself when you are wronged, and don't let bullies hide behind official titles or positions of authority. Brenda thought being HOA president put her above the rules that apply to everyone else. She learned in the most painful way possible that it does not. The final coda to the story came about a year after the trial. I received a letter in the mail, handwritten on plain stationery. It was from Brenda. She wrote that she was in therapy working through her issues and that she wanted to apologize for her behavior. She acknowledged that she had been wrong to take the cord and wrong to lie about it. She said she understood if I could not forgive her, but she hoped I would at least accept her apology. I read the letter several times, trying to gauge whether it was sincere or just another manipulation. Ultimately, I decided it did not matter. I had already moved on from the whole situation. I wrote back a brief note saying I accepted her apology and wished her well, and that was the end of it. No point in holding grudges or dwelling on past conflicts. Life is too short for that. Sarah and I are still living happily in Desert Vista Estates. We have made good friends among our neighbors, and the community has become the pleasant, peaceful place it should have been all along. My generator sits ready in the garage, with both cords properly stored and secured. I have not had to use it much lately because the power grid has been more stable, but I sleep better knowing I am prepared for the next emergency. And if anyone ever asks me about HOA horror stories, I have a good one to tell. The story of how an HOA president's theft of a $600 generator cord led to her arrest, conviction, and removal from power. It is a cautionary tale about the dangers of petty authoritarianism and the importance of accountability, even in the smallest institutions. The truth is, HOAs can serve useful purposes when they are run by reasonable people focused on genuine community improvement. But they can also become vehicles for petty tyrants to exercise power over their neighbors' lives, hiding behind covenants and regulations to justify unreasonable demands. What happened with Brenda was an extreme case, but the underlying dynamic is common in HOAs across the country. People get elected to boards and start treating their neighbors like subjects rather than fellow homeowners with equal rights. That is why I am now involved with the HOA board myself, serving on the Architectural Review Committee. I want to make sure we never slide back into the kind of toxic enforcement culture that Brenda created. We review requests for modifications or improvements with common sense and flexibility, understanding that people need to adapt their homes to their needs. We focus on genuine issues that affect property values and quality of life, not on measuring grass heights with rulers or counting how many hours garbage cans are visible. It is amazing how much better the neighborhood functions when the HOA acts like a service organization rather than a government. People are more willing to comply with reasonable requests when they feel respected rather than policed. Disputes get resolved through conversation rather than fines and threats. And everyone is happier, which is the whole point of living in a planned community. The generator cord that started it all is still serving me well. I pull it out during monsoon season when storms sometimes knock out power, and it works perfectly every time. Sometimes I look at it and think about the whole crazy chain of events it set in motion. A piece of orange and black cable, custom made with industrial connectors, and a stamped serial number, became the key piece of evidence in a criminal trial. You never know what small object in your life might take on unexpected significance. I also keep all my receipts and documentation much more carefully now. The serial number records, purchase receipts, and photographs that proved my ownership of the cord taught me the value of maintaining good records for all significant purchases. It is not paranoia, it is just prudent. In a world where people can and will take your property without permission, having proof of ownership is essential. The broader lesson, though, is about standing up for yourself when you are wronged. It would have been easier to just let the cord go, to buy a replacement and move on, to avoid the hassle of police reports and court dates. But doing that would have sent the message that Brenda could get away with her behavior. It would have emboldened her to continue abusing her position and targeting other residents. By fighting back, by insisting on accountability, I not only got justice for myself, but also helped protect the entire community from further abuse. Sometimes doing the right thing is inconvenient. Sometimes it takes time and effort and persistence, but it is worth it. The rule of law only means something if people are willing to use it to stand up and say, no, this is wrong, and I am not going to let it slide. That is what I did with the stolen generator cord, and I would do it again in a heartbeat. As I sit here now, writing down this whole crazy story, I am grateful for how it turned out. My property was returned, justice was served, The neighborhood improved, and I learned valuable lessons about documentation, persistence, and accountability. And I have a hell of a story to tell at parties, the kind of story that makes people shake their heads in disbelief, and then check their own HOA covenants with new suspicion. So if you are reading this and you are dealing with your own HOA nightmare, take heart. You don't have to accept abuse from petty tyrants just because they have a title. Document everything, know your rights, and don't be afraid to use the legal system when necessary. It exists for exactly these kinds of situations, to protect citizens from those who would abuse positions of trust and authority. And if you are serving on an HOA board, please, for the love of everything good, remember that you are serving your neighbors, not ruling over them. Exercise common sense, show flexibility, and focus on real problems rather than petty rule enforcement. Nobody wants to live in a neighborhood run by someone who measures lawn grass with a ruler or counts how long garbage cans are visible from the street. Be the reasonable person you would want on the board if you were just a regular homeowner. That is the real moral of this story. Power, even the small amount of power that comes with an HOA board position, can corrupt people who are not careful. Brenda let her authority go to her head, started treating neighbors as subjects to be controlled, and ultimately committed a crime because she could not stand someone defying her petty regulations. She paid a heavy price for that corruption, losing her position, her reputation, and nearly her freedom. It did not have to be that way. If she had approached me with respect, if she had worked with me to find a reasonable solution to the generator situation, if she had treated me as a neighbor, an equal rather than a subject to be controlled, none of the bad things would have happened. We could have found a compromise that satisfied safety concerns while allowing me to use emergency equipment. Instead, she chose confrontation, theft, and lies, and she lost everything as a result. That is the cautionary tale I hope others will take from this story. Whether you are in an HOA or any other organization with authority over others, remember that respect and reasonableness will get you much further than rigid rule enforcement and power plays. And if you are dealing with someone who has forgotten that lesson, don't be afraid to stand up for yourself and demand accountability. The system works, but only if people are willing to use it. Now, whenever I fire up my generator during a power outage, I smile a little bit thinking about how that expensive orange and black cord became the instrument of justice. It kept my house cool during brutal Arizona heat waves, and it also brought down a petty tyrant who thought she was above the law. Not bad for 25 feet of custom electrical cable.